Thus the heavens and the earth were finished. This is in relationship to Genesis 1, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God ended his work, which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work, which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work, which God created and made. So that's wisdom in that one too, I think, the idea of the Sabbath, you know, because one of the things, I've worked with a lot of people who were hyper-conscientious, and the thing about hyper-conscientious people is that they'll just work till they die. And that's actually not very productive, because then they're dead and they can't work. And so what you have to do with hyper-conscientious people is you have to say, well, I know you'd rather do nothing but work, and maybe you're just as guilty as you can possibly be when you're not working, but let's figure out what you're up to. And what you're up to, in all probability, is the attempt to be productive in the least problematic, longest sustaining possible manner. And that might mean you have to take a rest. And so one of the things I used to work with lawyers, with people who had risen to the top of large law firms, and they were hyper-productive types, and they were often, you know, trying to hit their impossible quota for yearly hours, and burning themselves to a frazzle as a consequence. And one of the things that we used to do was, they couldn't work fewer hours, because a day that just didn't work. But what we did was we'd have them take more time off, you know, like a 4-day weekend every 2 months or something that was plotted out into the future. And then we'd track their billable hours, which is their degree of productivity. It would actually increase. So that was so cool, because you could take hardworking people and you could say, look, you know, take a break. Why? Well, because you'll be more productive if you take a break. No, that couldn't possibly be. Like, I should just work flat out all the time. It's like, let's test that out. You take a break now and then. It's like, well, what happened was their productivity would increase, often by 10%. So there's wisdom here too, which is okay. And this alludes to the Adam and Eve story near the end. You're self-conscious, you discover the future, you have to work. Well, then the question is, how much should you work? And one answer is, you better bloody well work all the time, because no matter how much work you do, you're not solving your problems. They're coming along, man. And you can stack up all the money you want. You can stack up all the wealth you want. It is not going to protect you in the final analysis. So you better be hitting the ground running, and you better run flat out all the time. Well, what happens if you do that? Well, then you die. It's not a good solution. So maybe you should rest. And so how does that rest get instantiated? Well, it's not easy to tell, but one way to do it, let's say conceptually, is to say, look, even God had to rest 1 day a week. And so you don't have to be so presumptuous to assume that if God had to rest 1 day a week, that maybe, you know, you are allowed to work nonstop without a break at all. You know, and I think our culture has slipped into that in quite a dangerous way, because everything is open all the time. And I mean, I find that just as convenient as the rest of you, but, you know, it's so strange to talk to modern people, because one of the things they always tell you, we say, well, how are you? And what do they always say? They don't say good, they don't say bad, they say busy. It's like, yeah, well, okay. And out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So 2 trees are marked out among the rest. One is the tree of life, and one is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, you know when you read something like that, if you're thinking about it, that you're in a metaphorical space. Now, we've got to be careful about metaphors, because, you know, I could say, and yeah, that the chaos order idea is a metaphor, but then I also said, well, wait a second, it's a metaphor, but it's also what your brain is adapted to. And so, you know, let's just not be pushing the idea that it's merely a metaphor too hard. And the same thing is happening here. These are metaphors, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But that doesn't exactly mean that they're mere metaphors, because sometimes, as I mentioned before, if you have a set of things and you abstract out from them a common element, you can make a strong case that the common element is more real than the set of things from which you abstracted it. That's the whole utility in abstraction. Why would you bother with it otherwise? If you can't take a set of things and say, look, there's something in common across this set of things that's more important than the differences between them, then you wouldn't bother abstracting at all. And so the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil are abstractions. Now, one of the questions is, this is a tough one, man. I tried to figure out for a long time why a fruit and something you eat would be associated with the transformation of psychology, because that's basically what happens in the Adam and Eve story. Why would it be something that you eat? Now, Eric Neumann, who was one of Jung's students, had written a fair bit about this and got a fair ways with it. And he said, well, you know, we've noticed forever that the act of eating, especially if you're hungry, especially if you're starving, produces a rapid spiritual transformation, right? I mean, some of you, this is worth knowing, you probably have a crabby partner or child, because everyone does. And one thing you might try is that if they get erratic during the day and, you know, get all volatile about nothing at all, just give them something to eat. Really, I'll tell you, man, this solves, I do this with my clinical clients all the time. It's like, they say, well, I fly off the handle at the littlest things. It's like, okay, yeah, just try this for a week. When you're crabby and unreasonable, eat a piece of cheese or eat a peanut butter sandwich. Eat something that's high protein, high fat. And then just wait 10 minutes and see if you're sane. And you'll find out that you're sane after you eat so often that you just can't believe how crazy you are when you're hungry. Look, it's really absolutely bloody remarkable. So I'm telling you, try this. It'll especially if you don't eat breakfast. This will change your life. And so here's a practical bit of information for you too, for all of you antisocial types who are going to end up in prison. So if you're in prison and you want to go on parole, okay, so you have to go in front of the judge and tell him why you're not going to do it again. So here's the deal. It doesn't really matter what you did, and it doesn't really matter what you promise. What matters is whether you see the judge before lunch or after lunch. Because if you see the judge after lunch, the probability that you'll get parole is 60% higher. Yeah, right. That is just like... So never have an argument with your partner when you're hungry or when they're hungry, especially if you want something from them. It's like, here's the sandwich. They'll eat it, then they'll be happy. Then you can manipulate them. Before that, man, no.